You know, there's something about Christmas dinner that brings out both the best and worst in families. The warm glow of candles, the lingering scent of roasted turkey, and those moments when conversation flows like good wine, until it doesn't. This is one of those stories that starts with crystal stemware catching the light, and ends with lessons nobody expected to learn. Robert Anderson was 73 that Christmas of 2024, the kind of man who still ironed his shirts on Sunday evenings and remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. He'd been widowed for 10 years now. His Margaret had passed after a long illness that taught him more about grace under pressure than any engineering textbook ever could. Their only son, Michael, was 35, married to Ashley, and father to 2 grandchildren who visited just often enough for Robert to spoil them properly. Now, Robert had spent his whole life being what folks used to call steady. He was an engineer by trade, the kind who believed problems had solutions if you just applied enough patience and elbow grease. He'd raised Michael alone after Margaret died, working overtime to pay for college, co-signing loans, helping with down payments, the sorts of sacrifices parents make without keeping score, or so they tell themselves. That particular Christmas Eve, as Robert was clearing the dinner plates and humming along to Bing Crosby on the radio, his leather briefcase took a tumble from the side table. You know how these things go. One moment, everything's peaceful. The next moment, papers are scattered across the hardwood like autumn leaves, and your whole world changes direction. Michael's fork stopped halfway to his mouth when he saw the letterhead. Ashley leaned forward like a cat spotting a canary. The document at the top of the pile was from a law office, and the number 15 million seemed to glow under the dining room lights. Dad, Michael said, his voice cracking like he was 16 again. Did I read that right? Now, Robert's brother Harold had been one of those quiet success stories you hear about, but rarely see. Built a software company from his garage, sold it for more money than a small town sees in a decade, and died 3 months earlier without ever having married or had children. Robert had been his only family, which made him the sole inheritor of a fortune he'd never expected. The silence that followed Michael's question felt thick enough to cut with Margaret's good carving knife. Ashley set down her wine glass with the careful precision of someone trying very hard to appear casual, but Robert could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. "Your Uncle Harold," Ashley said, her voice taking on that honey-sweet tone she used when she wanted something, "the one who passed away in September?" Robert nodded, gathering the scattered papers. The estate finally cleared probate last week. What happened next was like watching a slow-motion accident. Ashley's hand found Michael's arm, her fingers drumming against his sleeve in that nervous way that meant she was calculating something. Michael sank into his chair as if his legs had given out, staring at his father with an expression Robert had never seen before, a look that was part wonder, part hunger, and entirely unsettling. 15 million, Michael whispered. "Dad, you never mentioned." "I didn't mention it because it just happened," Robert said, folding the papers carefully. "Harold built his company from nothing, sold it 2 years before he died. Never married, no children. I was his only family." Now, here's where the story takes a turn that would make Norman Rockwell put down his paintbrush. Ashley leaned forward, and Robert could practically see the dollar signs reflecting in her eyes. That's incredible, Robert," she said. "What a blessing for you." She paused, and that pause stretched like taffy. "For you." The way she said "you" hung in the air like cigarette smoke in a small room. Michael was staring at his hands, and Robert could see his son's mind working, processing, calculating. It was Ashley who broke the silence first. "You don't need all that money," she said, and there it was, direct as a punch to the gut. "I mean, at your age, what would you do with $15 million? Robert felt something cold settle in his chest, like when you step outside on a January morning and the air hits your lungs. He looked at his son, his only child, the boy he'd raised alone after Margaret died, and saw a stranger looking back. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Robert asked quietly. Ashley was ready for this question. She'd probably been rehearsing it since the papers hit the floor. "We're family, Robert. Family should support each other. And with little Emma and Jake to think about." Here she gestured toward the framed photos on the mantel. "Their college funds, their future. We could really use some help," Michael added, finally finding his voice, but not his courage to meet his father's eyes. Robert set the papers on the table between them, his movements deliberate as a chess player making his final move. "The money just became available," he said. "I haven't even decided what to do with it yet. But surely you see that sharing would be the right thing." Ashley pressed, her mask beginning to slip. "We're young. We have dreams, plans. We could actually do something meaningful with it." The grandfather clock in the hallway chose that moment to chime 9 o'clock, its deep tones marking time that suddenly felt precious. Robert looked at his son and daughter-in-law, really looked at them, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet like it had the day Margaret took her last breath. "This is an appropriate dinner conversation," he said finally. Ashley's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Money is always appropriate conversation when it affects family." Michael nodded, emboldened by his wife's certainty. "Ashley has a point, Dad. We've been struggling while you've been comfortable. Maybe it's time to think about your grandchildren's future." Robert stood slowly, his joints protesting after sitting too long. The papers crinkled as he gathered them, and he could feel the weight of 35 years of sacrifice pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "I think we should finish cleaning up," he said. "You're staying the night, aren't you? The guest room upstairs is ready." Ashley and Michael exchanged a look, quick, loaded with meaning Robert was only beginning to understand. "Of course we're staying," Ashley said with that calculated sweetness. "We have so much more to talk about." As Robert headed toward his bedroom, he heard their whispered conversation starting up again behind him, urgent and hungry. The house suddenly felt very small, like the walls were closing in. He'd been looking forward to Christmas morning, to watching the grandchildren open presents, to that peaceful feeling of family together. Now he wondered if he'd ever feel that peace again. Later that night, as Robert lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, he could hear voices through the thin floorboards above. At first, he tried to ignore them. After all, they were married, they needed to talk. But Ashley's voice cut through the darkness with an edge that made his blood run cold. "That old man doesn't deserve $15 million, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's wasted his whole life being ordinary, working that boring engineering job, living in this tiny house. We're young. We could actually do something with that money." Robert pressed his ear to the ceiling, his heart hammering against his ribs. 35 years of fatherhood, of sacrifice, of love given freely, and this was what it had earned him. Contempt from a daughter-in-law who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth. "Maybe you're right," Michael said, and those 4 words shattered something deep in Robert's chest. He has been pretty selfish with money lately. Remember when we asked for help with the car payments? He acted like we were asking for the world. Selfish. His son, the boy he'd raised alone, the young man whose college he'd paid for, whose house down payment he'd provided, called him selfish. Robert gripped the sheets so hard his knuckles went white. "Exactly," Ashley continued, her confidence growing. "We've struggled while he's been sitting comfortable. That inheritance should be shared. We deserve it more than he does." "But how do we convince him?" Michael asked. "Leave that to me," Ashley said, and Robert could hear the calculation in her voice. Men his age can be influenced, especially when they're lonely. And if gentle persuasion doesn't work, we have options. What kind of options? Legal ones. Think about it. He's getting older, maybe not thinking as clearly as he used to. We could contest his mental state, claim undue influence from Harold. There are precedents for these things. Robert's hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. They weren't just talking about his money. They were talking about stripping away his dignity, his independence, his very identity as a competent human being. 15 million, Michael, Ashley continued, her voice dreamy now. We could pay off the house, buy a new car, take that trip to Europe we've always talked about. Emma and Jake could go to private school. We could actually live. What if he says no again? Ashley's laugh was soft and dangerous. He won't. Trust me, I know how to handle men like your father. He's been alone too long. He's vulnerable. A little guilt about not being there for his grandchildren, some tears about our financial struggles. He'll cave. The clock read 12:17 a.m. when their voices finally faded to whispers, then silence. Robert lay there until dawn broke through his curtains, processing every word, every casual dismissal of his worth, every cold calculation of his remaining years. By the time he heard them stirring around 7, something fundamental had changed inside him. The loving father who had sacrificed everything for his ungrateful son was gone. In his place sat someone much more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and $15 million to protect. He got up and made coffee, his movements precise and methodical. The kitchen filled with that rich morning aroma, and he sat at his small table, waiting. They thought they knew him. They thought he was weak, predictable, easily manipulated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Steam rose from Robert's coffee cup in the early morning light, but he couldn't taste anything. The kitchen felt different somehow, smaller, like the walls had moved closer during the night. Above him, he could hear Ashley and Michael stirring, their voices low and conspiratorial. As he sat there watching the sun climb over his neighbor's fence, Robert found himself thinking about Margaret's last days in the hospital. She'd been so weak, but her mind was sharp as ever. "Take care of Michael," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. "But don't forget to live for yourself, Robert." He'd promised her he would. Another lie he'd told himself. When Margaret died, Michael had been too grief-stricken to help with the funeral arrangements. Robert had chosen the casket, written the obituary, organized the service. Michael had shown up in a wrinkled suit, dry-eyed, and left immediately after the burial to process with Ashley. Robert had grieved alone, just as he'd done everything else alone. Before that, there had been college, 4 years of 80-hour weeks at the engineering firm, taking every overtime shift, every weekend project. $80,000 in student loans he'd co-signed, then paid himself when Michael couldn't find steady work after graduation. At the graduation ceremony, Michael had thanked his professors, his girlfriend, his study group. He'd forgotten to mention his father in his speech. Robert had watched from the back row, proud and invisible. 5 years ago, when Michael and Ashley were renting that cramped apartment, Ashley had dropped hints about home ownership like breadcrumbs, leading Robert exactly where she wanted him to go. "If only we had help with a down payment," she'd sighed. "The market is so competitive." Robert had liquidated his retirement investment account, $150,000, his security, his future, and handed it over so they could have granite countertops and a 2-car garage. Ashley had said thank you once, then immediately started hinting about furniture money. But it was the daily sacrifices that hurt more than the big ones. $2,000 a month in emergency loans that were never repaid. Free babysitting every weekend while they went to expensive restaurants he couldn't afford. Grocery shopping for their family during Michael's frequent unemployment spells. Car repairs, medical bills, vacation funds. Robert had been an ATM with a heartbeat. He opened his eyes and did the math in his head. 35 years of sacrifice. College, the house, monthly support, emergencies, gifts, babysitting, groceries, over $400,000. His entire savings, his retirement, his future, all given freely to a son who saw him as selfish. Margaret would be ashamed of what Michael had become, but she'd be more ashamed of Robert for enabling it. He'd created this monster by being too generous, by teaching Michael that love meant money, that family meant taking without giving back. The coffee had gone cold in his hands when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Ashley's heels clicking against wood, Michael's heavier tread behind her. They were coming down for breakfast, ready to continue last night's conversation. But the man waiting for them wasn't the same man who'd overheard their midnight plotting. That generous, naive father had died somewhere between midnight and dawn. In his place sat someone harder, someone who'd finally learned that love without respect was just exploitation. Ashley entered his kitchen like she owned it, her heels clicking against the linoleum with sharp precision. She dressed carefully, a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look innocent, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested vulnerability. She was preparing for war, but she dressed for a tea party. "Good morning, Robert," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "You're up early." Michael shuffled behind her, avoiding his father's eyes. His shoulders were hunched, defensive, like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Couldn't sleep, Robert said simply, gesturing to the coffee pot. Help yourselves. Ashley poured 2 cups, her movements graceful and deliberate. This big house must get lonely sometimes, she said, settling into the chair across from him. All these empty rooms, just you rattling around. Robert sipped his coffee and said nothing. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. We've been thinking, Ashley continued, about last night, about your inheritance. Have you? Michael finally met his father's eyes, then quickly looked away. Ashley has some good points, Dad. About family. About sharing blessings. Ashley's hand found his arm, her fingers stroking encouragingly. We're not asking for charity, Robert. We're talking about family responsibility. Robert set down his cup with deliberate care. And what kind of help are you thinking about? Her smile widened. Well, you don't really need $15 million, do you? I mean, at your age, what would you even do with all that money? That's not really your concern. The sweetness in her voice took on an edge. But it is our concern, Robert. We're family, and family looks out for each other. Michael leaned forward, finding his courage in his wife's certainty. Dad, think about Emma and Jake. Their college funds, their future. Don't you want to help your grandchildren? I've been helping them their entire lives, Robert said quietly. I've been helping you both for decades. Ashley's mask slipped slightly. Sure, you've helped here and there, but this is different. This is real money. Life-changing money. For whom? For all of us. Her voice rose, then she caught herself, forcing the smile back. We're young, Robert. We have dreams, plans. We could actually do something meaningful with that inheritance. Robert stood slowly and walked to the window that overlooked his small backyard. The December morning was gray and cold, matching his mood. You know what I think? He said without turning around. I think you both believe you deserve my brother's money more than I do. The silence behind him was deafening. That's not. Michael started. Yes, it is. Robert turned to face them. You think I'm too old, too ordinary, too boring to deserve $15 million. You think I'll just let it sit in a bank while you could be living your dreams. Ashley's composure cracked. Well, wouldn't you? What are you going to do with it, Robert? Buy a bigger house? Travel the world? You've never wanted anything. Maybe that's because I spent 35 years wanting things for my son instead. Michael flinched as if he'd been slapped. We deserve some of that money, Ashley continued, her voice hardening. We've struggled while you've been comfortable. We're the ones with young children, with futures to build. You're just going to hoard it like some old miser. Based on what do you deserve it? Robert asked quietly. Based on being family, she snapped. Based on being young and full of potential instead of old and useless. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Michael's eyes widened, realizing his wife had gone too far. Ashley, he whispered, but she was past caring about masks. It's true, isn't it? What's he going to do with $15 million except count it? We could actually use it. Robert walked back to the table, his movements calm and measured. Is that what you both think? That I'm old and useless? Michael couldn't look at him. Dad, that's not what she meant. Yes, it is. Robert sat down across from them. And you agree with her, don't you, son? You think you deserve your uncle's money more than your father does. Maybe we do, Michael said quietly. And there it was, the truth, finally spoken in daylight. Ashley reached across the table, her hand grasping for Robert's. Please think about your grandchildren. Think about their future. Don't be selfish. Robert pulled his hand away. Selfish? We'll contest this legally if we have to, Ashley said, desperation creeping into her voice. You're getting older, maybe not thinking as clearly. Harold might have unduly influenced you somehow. Robert stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Get out. They froze. Get out of my house. Now. Ashley's mouth fell open. Robert, you can't be serious. Pack your things and leave. Both of you. Michael half rose from his chair. Dad, please, let's talk about this reasonably. There's nothing reasonable about what you're asking. There's nothing reasonable about what you think you deserve. Robert walked to the front door and opened it. You have 10 minutes. 3 weeks of blessed silence had lulled Robert into believing they'd accepted defeat. He was reading the morning paper, coffee steaming beside him, when the doorbell shattered his peace. The man at his door wore a crisp uniform, and carried a clipboard thick with official-looking papers. Robert Anderson? Yes. Legal documents requiring your signature. He held out the clipboard with practiced efficiency. Sign here, please. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he signed. The envelope felt heavy, ominous. Inside, legal letterhead caught the light. Petition for determination of incapacity. His vision blurred as he read further. Petitioners Michael R. Anderson and Ashley M. Anderson hereby request this honorable court to determine that respondent Robert D. Anderson lacks the mental capacity to manage his financial affairs. The words swam on the page. Dementia, irrational decisions, unable to manage affairs. They were trying to have him declared mentally incompetent. Attached were witness statements from neighbors he barely knew, claiming they'd observed concerning behavior and signs of cognitive decline. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down supposedly witnessed him talking to himself in the yard and forgetting to bring in his mail for days. Robert had never spoken to Mrs. Patterson beyond polite greetings. The cruelest blow came on page 4. Petitioners have secured respondents' assets totaling $500,000 pending this court's determination to prevent further financial harm. They'd frozen $500,000 of his money based on lies. But here's the thing about engineers. They don't just build bridges and design systems. They solve problems. And Robert Anderson had just been handed the biggest problem of his life. 2 hours later, he sat across from Sarah Thompson at Thompson & Associates, spreading financial records across her conference table like a battle plan. Robert, these financial records are immaculate, Sarah said, flipping through pages. Your portfolio performance is better than most fund managers achieve. She compared the documents with their petition, her expression darkening. This Dr. Patricia Williams. I've never heard of her. Let me check the medical board database. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She's not board certified in geriatrics. She's actually a pediatrician in Tacoma. Ashley's college roommate, Roberts said. I remember her from their wedding. And these witness statements. Sarah pulled out a magnifying glass, examining signatures. Look at this handwriting. The loops in the G's, the slant of the letters. These signatures were written by the same person. Ashley always had distinctive handwriting, Roberts said quietly. Too many loops. Sarah leaned back in her chair. This isn't just a weak case, Robert. It's fraud. The next few days unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Medical evaluations that prove Robert's cognitive function was not just normal, but exceptional. Audio recordings of Ashley and Michael's conversations that he'd captured through the ceiling. Washington was a one-party consent state, after all. Most damning of all were Ashley's social media posts. While claiming poverty and desperation, she'd been posting photos of expensive vacations, designer purchases, and restaurant meals that cost more than some people spend on groceries in a month. The community center meeting Ashley had arranged to expose elder abuse became her downfall instead. When Robert presented his evidence, 30 years of financial records, documentation of over $400,000 in support he provided, screenshots of Ashley's contradictory social media posts, the room's sympathy shifted like wind changing direction. The neighbors who'd been ready to call social services on Robert's behalf were now looking at Ashley and Michael with disappointment and disgust. But Robert wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. 3 days after the community meeting, Michael arrived at the construction site to find his co-workers avoiding eye contact. His boss pulled him aside with a grim expression. Look, you're a good worker, Mike Rodriguez said, but we've got a problem. 3 clients have called asking for different crew assignments. They're uncomfortable with the family drama. Word spreads fast in construction circles. Michael's world crumbled that quickly. His reputation, built over years of honest work, destroyed by his wife's lies and his own greed. At home, Ashley was discovering that social media was a double-edged sword. Friend requests withdrawn. Group chat removals. Former supporters now silent or openly critical. The community had seen the evidence, done the math, and reached their own conclusions. That evening, desperation drove them to Robert's door. Their knock was tentative, uncertain. We need to talk, Ashley said, attempting her old manipulation tactics. I think we may have misunderstood some things. Robert stepped aside to let them enter, but his body language remained distant. They sat in his living room like supplicants before a judge. Ashley tried tears, guilt, family obligations. Michael attempted father-son bonding and shared memories. Robert listened patiently, then responded with devastating calm. Ashley, you call me mentally incompetent. You try to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs. You lied to our entire community about my character. But we could drop all that legal stuff, Ashley interrupted. We just need some help getting back on our feet. I helped for 35 years, Robert said quietly. You responded by calling me selfish and senile. Michael leaned forward desperately. Dad, please. We're family. Robert's laugh was cold. Family doesn't forge documents. Family doesn't try to steal inheritances. Family doesn't humiliate each other publicly. Their protests grew more frantic, their promises more desperate, but Robert remained unmoved. The final blow came in the form of legal documents delivered by process server. Sarah Thompson had prepared them with ruthless efficiency, a demand for immediate payment of $427,000 in documented loans, with interest that Michael and Ashley had signed for over the years. Every gift Robert thought he'd given freely had been carefully structured as a loan with clear repayment terms. His engineering mind had documented everything, preparing for a day he'd hoped would never come. They had 30 days to pay or face bankruptcy. That evening, as winter gave way to early spring, Robert found himself in his garden planting bulbs that wouldn't bloom until the following year. Michael appeared on his doorstep, alone this time, carrying a small shovel. Can I help with the planting? He asked quietly. Robert handed him a bulb. These won't bloom until next spring. Some things take time to grow properly. They worked in comfortable silence as the sun began to set. Finally, Michael spoke. Dad, I don't know how to apologize for 35 years of selfishness. Start with today, Robert said. Make different choices going forward. The debt. I'll pay every penny back. It might take years. I know you will. That's why you're here planting flowers instead of driving away with Ashley. Michael looked up from the soil. She left this morning. Filed for divorce yesterday. He paused. She said, I was choosing you over her. Were you? I was choosing what's right. As darkness settled over the garden, Robert looked at the neat rows of planted bulbs and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. Real family love required respect, not just obligation. It demanded accountability, not just forgiveness. For the first time in decades, he had both. The spring bulbs would bloom next year when the ground was ready for new growth. Some relationships, like some plants, needed to die back to the roots before they could grow properly again. And sometimes, just sometimes, the second blooming was the most beautiful of all. The end.